Before we pick up from where we left off in part 1, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you can stay up to date with the channel's content. Now, if you haven't watched part 1 yet, go ahead and do so before moving on to this video. So to begin part 2, Mary Mallon has been caught at this point and forcibly quarantined on North Brother Island, a quarantine that would last nearly 3 years. Mary was confined to the island between the years 1907 and 1910, but Mary's protests were fierce and vocal. In 1909, Mallon tried to sue the New York Health Department, but her complaint was denied and the case dismissed by the New York Supreme Court. In a letter to her lawyer, she complained that she was treated like a guinea pig. She was obliged to give samples for analysis 3 times a week, but for 6 months was not allowed to visit an eye doctor, even though her eyelid was paralyzed and she had to bandage it at night. Her medical treatment was hectic. She was given urotropin in 3-month courses for a year, threatening to destroy her kidneys. That was changed to brewer's yeast and hexamethylenotetramine in increasing doses. Mary was first told that she had typhoid in her intestinal tract, then in her bowel muscles, then in her gallbladder. Mallon herself claimed never to believe that she was a carrier. With the help of a friend, she sent several samples to an independent New York laboratory. All came back negative for typhoid. On North Brother Island, almost a quarter of her analyses from March 1907 through June 1909 were also negative. After 2 years and 11 months of Mallon's quarantine, the New York State Commissioner of Health, Eugene H. Porter, decided that disease carriers should no longer be quarantined and that Mallon could be freed if she agreed to stop working as a cook and take reasonable efforts to avoid transmitting typhoid to others. On February 19, 1910, Mallon said she was prepared to change her occupation, that of a cook, and would give assurance by affidavit that she would, upon her release, take such hygienic precautions as would protect those with whom she came in contact. Mary was released from quarantine and returned to the mainland. Upon her release, Mallon was given a job as a laundry worker, which paid less than cooking, $20 per month instead of $50. After a time, she wounded her arm and the wound became infected, meaning that she could not work at all for 6 months. After several unsuccessful years, she started cooking again. Mary used fake surnames like Breshoff or Brown and accepted jobs as a cook against the explicit instructions of health authorities. No agencies that hired servants for affluent families would offer her employment, so for the next 5 years, she worked in a number of kitchens in restaurants, hotels, and spa facilities. Almost everywhere she worked, there were outbreaks of typhoid. However, she changed jobs frequently, and Soper was unable to find her. In 1915, Mary Mallon started working at Sloan Hospital for Women in New York City. 25 people were infected, and 2 ultimately died. The chief obstetrician, Dr. Edward B. Cragen, called Soper and asked him to help in the investigation. Soper identified Mallon from the servants' verbal descriptions and also by her handwriting. Mallon managed to flee again, but the police were able to find her and arrest her while she was on her way to Long Island to bring food to a friend. After the authorities took her into custody, Mary returned to quarantine on North Brother Island. As for Mallon's life on North Brother Island during her second quarantine, not much is known. She remained on North Brother for more than 23 years, and the authorities accommodated her with a private 1-story cottage. And as of 1918, Mary was allowed to take day trips to the mainland. Years later, in 1925, Dr. Alexandra Plavska came to the island for an internship. Dr. Plavska organized a laboratory on the 2nd floor of the chapel and offered Mallon a job as a technician, where she also performed tasks such as bottle washing, record keeping, and laboratory equipment preparation for the resident pathologists. Initially, the media championed the health authorities for the efforts they put into protecting the public from the seemingly malicious and reckless Mallon. At first, articles mentioned how Dr. Josephine Baker claimed Mallon attacked her and other doctors with forks and came at them fighting and swearing, akin to George Soper's own account. But the press later eased up on Mallon, originally believing her to be at fault for all the outbreaks. The press ended up postulating that she was oblivious to her status as a typhoid carrier. The media argued that Mallon was unaware she was carrying anything, and that germs that she didn't know she carried, were to blame ultimately. Public health officials argued the opposite and maintained that they treated her well. In a 2013 article in the Annals of Gastroenterology, the authors concluded, "The history of Mary Mallon, being declared unclean, like a leper, may give us some moral lessons on how to protect the ill and how we can be protected from illness." By the time she, Mary Mallon, died, New York health officials had identified more than 400 other healthy carriers of Salmonella typhi. But no one else was forcibly confined or victimized as an unwanted ill. A 2011 article published by the Countryman Press states that this case highlighted the problematic nature of the subject and the need for an enhanced medical and legal social treatment model aimed at improving the status of disease carriers and limiting their impact on society. Other healthy typhoid carriers identified in the first quarter of the 20th century include Tony Labella, an Italian immigrant, presumed to have caused more than 100 cases, with 5 deaths; an Adirondack guide dubbed Typhoid John, presumed to have infected 36 people, with 2 deaths; and Alphonse Cotilles, a restaurateur and bakery owner. The health technology of the era did not have a completely effective solution. There weren't any antibiotics to fight the infection, and gallbladder removal was a dangerous and a potentially fatal operation. Some modern specialists claim that typhoid bacteria can become integrated in macrophages and then reside in intestinal lymph nodes or the spleen. As for Mary Mallon's ultimate fate, she spent the rest of her life in quarantine at Riverside Hospital on North Brother Island. Mallon was quite active until suffering a stroke in 1932 and completely confined to the hospital afterwards. Mallon never completely recovered, and half of her body remained paralyzed, and on November 11, 1938, Mary Mallon died at the age of 69 after a bout of pneumonia. Mallon's body was ultimately cremated, and her ashes were buried at St. Raymond's Cemetery in the Bronx. 9 people attended her funeral. The ethical question of her arrest and forced quarantine is still being debated. Historians frequently discuss the argument of Mallon knowing that she was infecting her clients with typhoid, based on the frequency of the disease being present after her departure. They also cite the argument that antibiotics did not exist at this time, and 10% of those affected by Mallon carrying the infection died. By this argument, Mallon could be considered a murderer of those 10% of people if she knew she was a carrier of the disease, and would be a justification for her arrest. Others argue that Mallon did not know that she had the bacteria, and therefore did not deserve to be arrested when she never committed a crime. At the time, asymptomatic carriers were not understood, and Mallon was believed to have said that she did not feel sick, look sick, or have any sort of visible sickness. Although Mallon did not feel ill or look sick, the disease was living dormant in what was assumed to be her gallbladder. As for the lessons learned from Mallon's case, Mallon was the first person found to be an asymptomatic carrier of the typhoid bacterium, and this caused the health officials to have little to no idea of how to deal with her. However, Mallon's case helped these officials identify other people who carried diseases that were dormant in their bodies based on the information they learned from Mallon's case. Mallon's case created controversy concerning personal autonomy and social responsibility. It also was the first case that provided good evidence of the existence of asymptomatic carriers. It is hard to really say and make a firm and bold judgment on the matter. Some are of the opinion that Mary Mallon was a victim, a vessel for a harmful pathogen of which she had no control over, making her a super spreader nonetheless. But others were, and still are, of the belief that Mary Mallon was more than just a super spreader. They are of the opinion that she was a supervillain. A supervillain worthy of nothing more than the tainted legacy that precedes her. And that pretty much concludes the 2-part series on Typhoid Mary, aka the Killer Cook of New York. Let us know down below what you think of her case. Do you believe she was a murderous malcontent, hell-bent on bringing harm and possibly death to others? Or are you of the belief that she was a mere victim herself? Whatever your opinion might be, leave a comment down below explaining your stance on the infamous case of Mary Mallon. And to conclude this video, I just want to say that it's important to keep in mind that the story of Mary Mallon is just a mere contribution, and perhaps the most infamous contribution that stains the legacy of this now abandoned island. If you manage to look out onto North Brother Island today, you'll notice that nature has pretty much claimed the island back. Trees and ivy now engulf the ruined buildings and smokestacks that can still be vaguely spotted. Ever since the island's abandonment in the mid-20th century, it remains off-limits to the public. On top of the General Slocum disaster and Mary Mallon's captivity on North Brother Island, the island itself was also home to hundreds, if not thousands, of other unfortunate victims, some suffering from communicable illnesses and others from addiction. On top of hosting a hospital, North Brother Island also had a youth drug rehabilitation center from 1952 until 1964. So when we hear the stories like the General Slocum disaster or the infamous case of Typhoid Mary, just remember that this island was a crossroads of both notorious misfortune as well as silent suffering. The legacy of North Brother Island is stained with abhorrent experiences, both well-known but mostly unknown. Now, with the closing statement over with, I want to remind you to give this video a thumbs up. And be sure to subscribe so that you can stay up to date with this channel's content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.